Hello, folks. Welcome to this Penn Canada Writers in Exile reading. And welcome to the Harut Ethiopian Jazz Club. I was always intrigued by this jazz club, and when I first came here, I felt this warm spirit, but I wasn't sure what Harut meant, and I remember thinking, you know, Aaron Berhaney had named his newspaper after a river, and I wonder if Harut was perhaps something geographical or a metaphor for music or poetry or spirit, maybe something about love or beauty. And so I asked Tebebe, and he said, no, it's just my wife's name. So, but that stands for all of those things, Harut. So thank you both, Harut and Tebebe, for being our hosts here tonight. We have four fine writers from Afghanistan, Iran, Myanmar, and Mexico reading their work today. This is a small club, so I would just ask you to keep any conversation very quiet because sometimes at the back you can't hear very well. Although Anthony has adjusted the speakers, so we should be fine. So I'd like to, without further ado, invite our first reader, who is Bilal Sarwary from Afghanistan. Bilal? Salam alaikum. Bilal Kub Asti. Okay. When Bilal Sarwary was forced to leave Afghanistan after the Taliban stormed to power in 2021, he told CBC Radio it was like taking a knife in the heart. As an Afghan journalist, he has worked extensively with Western media, including the BBC and other ABC for 20 years, putting him on the Taliban's execution list. Bilal is a scholar majoring in the linkages between warfare, drugs, and terrorism, with a degree from Middlebury College in Vermont. He is in Canada with his wife and daughter, Sola.
Another daughter came 6 weeks ago.
Yes, second daughter. What is her name?
Jeddah, as in the city in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. And
she's the first Canadian in the family.
And your wife,
Fauzia.
Yeah. Is she here today?
Unfortunately not, because it's not easy to be the mother of two small girls, right?
True enough.
But next time.
Okay. Bilal is fluent in Pashto, Dari, Urdu, and English. Welcome, Bilal.
Thank you very much for such a kind introduction. And we're a little bit sad, Amanullah and myself, that we're here during Ramadan, which means we cannot eat or drink anything. Thank you for having me. It's a really privilege. I'll try not to be intimidated by such a distinguished crowd. The following events, the first chapter that I'm going to read, The Bloody Pomegranates, this is based on true events that I covered in the year 2021 in the month of August. The Arghandab River Valley outside of the city of Kandahar is home to Afghan pomegranates, but unfortunately, that's also where some of the most destructive fighting took place, which eventually led to the fall of Kandahar and eventually to the fall of Afghanistan. So I will start with that. The Bloody Pomegranates. The Kabul debacle was actually scripted long before in Afghanistan's dusty hinterland. For months, the Taliban had been prodding Afghan security forces in the provinces, draining their energy and breaking their resolve bit by bit. But away from the eye, there was something else. War fatigue was corroding the Afghan forces and the Afghan people from within. This war has destroyed generations, said Syed Ahmad Jan, a police officer in Arghandab, a district in the southern province of Kandahar, known for its pomegranates. For John, this was too personal. The 54-year-old said his two brothers, both policemen, were shot dead in front of him, right on the doorsteps of their family home. Killing of government officials, policemen, and tribal elders had become a daily reality, he said. We're sick of this fighting. What has it given us? Nothing, said John. I'm now the only breadwinner in a house which is full of widows and orphans. As John sat down to have tea in his modest home, his police radio flashed one distressing news after another from across the district. There's a whole generation of Afghans who have never seen peace. They have known life only from the shadows of guns and violence. They are tired of this uncertainty. A deputy soon informed John that a Taliban fighter had driven an explosive-laden vehicle into a police post, killing 13 policemen and himself in the suicide attack. Many of those killed were personally known to John. Every day I attend the funeral of a dear one. Say goodbye to a beloved friend, John said, getting into an unmarked police car. Every day I pick up the pieces and start all over again. How long can one carry on like this? John said he mostly travels in a civilian car to outwit Taliban ambush teams lying in a wait for officers like him. Our team has engaged insurgents in the pomegranate orchard there. An Afghan Special Forces commander, just known as Sharif, said, pointing to a green oasis a few meters away. Before John could step out of his Toyota Corolla, a bullet grazed past his ear, leaving him bleeding and forcing everyone to duck for cover. A Taliban sniper had taken the shot. John signaled his men to take position, and the whole place erupted in heavy machine gun fire. John was escorted to safety by Sharif. We keep losing our friends like this, said the young officer sadly, looking in the direction of gunfire. There's so much pressure on the men. No one in my unit has taken a break in 6 months. I haven't had a shower in weeks. Just look at my beard, he said, pointing to his scruffy facial hair. John's men, however, were lucky this time. There were fewer casualties among them. But the bloody pomegranate garden was littered with corpses of Taliban fighters. We're in a vicious cycle of violence, bloodshed, and heartbreak, John said, taking stock of the destruction. Whether we kill them or they kill us, ultimately, it is Afghanistan that bleeds. Note, the Taliban claimed the capital of Kandahar on August 12, 2021. This was the 11th provincial capital to fall within a week. This is a final story, which is also based on my final journey, actually, leaving the Serena Hotel in downtown Kabul with my family for the Kabul airport. I was in a convoy of about 200 people, mostly from the media, civil society, but also from the entertainment industry. So people like who had been entertaining Afghans on Tulu TV and many others. And I called it at the time Afghanistan sort of deadly tsunami when we got on those buses. And thanks to the Qatari ambassador who escorted us in the middle of the night, a mad rush. It was madness at the airport. Thousands of Afghans jostled on the narrow road leading to the airport gate. Toddlers, teenagers, mothers with babies, young and old, all pressed tight against each other like cattle in a pen. Days before, the airport had seen heart-wrenching scenes of Afghans clinging onto the wheels of departing planes and their desperation to escape the Taliban, only to fall to their deaths moments later. While Taliban manned the access to the airport, inside the US Marines held control, with both firing occasionally in the air to instill some order in the milling crowd. At some points, the US Marines and Taliban fighters stood less than 2 meters apart, even working together to secure the passage for would-be refugees. A reflection of the tragic irony of war. Are we okay with the? Okay.
You can carry on.
I think that's very good to know. About 20 minutes of negotiations at the gate, the convoy was lit in, filling the air with joy. But a thought wavered to those on the other side of the airport, and the young men we had all pushed out of the bus. A sudden emptiness enveloped me. Helpless myself, I could only pray for them. The buildings inside the airport were all taken up by troops, US and of other countries who were now arriving in hordes. So we had to wait out in the scorching sun. Qatari officials served water, juice, and snakes. Qatari officials served water, juice, and snacks. It's the same thing, more or less, in Afghanistan. you know. As never-ending lines of Afghans boarded one military aircraft after another. As I sat on the tarmac, my life flashed before me. 20 years ago, just when a passenger plane crashed into the World Trade Center in New York, followed by another one. I was an Afghan refugee boy selling carpets to gullible Westerners at a fake antique shop in Peshawar, Pakistan. My Afghan origins and command over Pashto and Dari and a working knowledge of English helped me get a job as a fixer with Abu Dhabi TV, whose new crew was keen to cross over into Afghanistan and report on the ensuing war. From there to ABC News and then to the BBC, one small step at a time shaped me into who I was. Over the following years, my travels to the remote interiors of Afghanistan and its front lines gave me a unique perspective of the life of ordinary Afghans, even as it forged my own identity in Afghan soil. But now, destiny, once again, was about to snatch this identity. I was going to be a refugee once again. Most of the planes landing at the airport were empty, but one had a group of foreign correspondents on board. I spotted among them Lise Doucet, my old friend and BBC's chief international correspondent. Bilal, you were always the one who said, I'll never leave Afghanistan. Lise said, as I slowly trudged up the line towards a waiting C-17 military transport plane. She was right. I had never imagined that I would be at the crossroads once again, with empty pockets and a broken heart. My love affair with Afghanistan is fatal, I told her. A torrent of tears broke the barrier as the C-17 took off. Today, I have buried my dreams, but I have not lost hope. Not yet. I will be back. Note, this is a factual account. Some names and descriptions of people have been changed to protect their identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bilal. I find it very interesting that you were with a group of celebrities, entertainers, singers, poets, I suppose, recognized faces that could no longer stay in Afghanistan because they would have been on television or they would be known, and they had to get out. Like yourself, you were a spokesman, an anti-war spokesman, and the Taliban had you on their list. So what a plane load of people that were leaving Afghanistan. It's very tragic.
When Liz kind of forced her way into me at the airport, we had to talk to Liz because she has been coming to Afghanistan since the 80s. And I call her the mother of Afghan journalism. She's trained so many of us. The one word that I had in that interview, Keith, was that this was a brain drain. My wife recognized this very popular Afghan TV hostess on Tulu TV, Afghanistan's most popular TV stations. They're still putting up a fight. And her name was Mariam Khorrami. So we would start our morning with Good Morning Tulu. And when I looked at her, I saw that Afghanistan was gone. When I saw that there was no place for people like Mariam and many of our colleagues, obviously the Taliban put a ban on all forms of entertainment, on music, and later on they would basically go and literally remove Afghan women from the public sphere, right? Not give them jobs, let alone entertainment. So it was sad, but I think in a nutshell, what that airplane for me was everything going down the drain in a matter of sort of days or hours. Yes. That we had all failed collectively in Afghanistan, sadly did not have a peace process. It was an exit deal, and that led to the Taliban takeover.
I wanted to ask you, you depended on Qatar, the ambassador, to help get you out. And did you have a plan B? If it wasn't for Qatar, how would you have exited Afghanistan?
Well, a couple of things complicated, I think, my presence. One, that I had run for parliament from my hometown in eastern Afghanistan on an anti-Islamic State, anti-Al-Qaeda platform, but also sort of on an education platform, coupled with reporting on the war. And, war reporting was never sort of seen, okay. And I think before Kabul fell, you had this series of assassinations, very mysterious assassinations, where members of the civil society, female judges, members of the media, they were all killed and murdered or on doorsteps in Kabul. And my name somehow was on a number of those lists. So I had all along the fear, but I had also hoped that my daughter Sola, who I named, Sola means peace in Afghanistan. So when she was born, we were hoping that we would have a ceasefire because this war was personal. My cousins were in the Afghan National Security Forces, and they would be coming back in coffins. Civilians would be killed, And when Kabul fell, believe it or not, the first time Kabul fell in 2001, I was a translator with Abu Dhabi TV. The Americans were carrying airstrikes against the Taliban. And one morning I woke up at the Pearl Continental Hotel and Taliban were gone. And the Northern Lines took over, right? And it was very sudden again, 20 years down the line. I was doing live TV hits when I started getting phone calls from several corners of Kabul. In fact, my wife's, I know you're looking at your watch, so please stop me. Maybe I'm on Afghan minutes here.
We're doing fine. We're doing fine.
Okay, good. So I got these WhatsApp messages, videos, in which you could see the Taliban had entered Kabul. And this was a remarkable comparison because in 2001, I was a translator. No one had smartphones. There was no WhatsApp. Forget about like videos and information flowing so fast. 20 years down the line, we were well ahead of the government, well, which had fled in essence. Ashraf Ghani, President Ashraf Ghani, the former president, and others had fled or they were forced to flee. So I found the Taliban on my doorsteps because my next door neighbor, who had been hiding for 3 years as a neighbor, he was a Taliban intelligence guy. And I lived on a street with a lot of Afghan officials and others. So he came to my house. And I knew at that moment that my life was in danger, But it was Middlebury College in the US, my college, my professors, the president of the college, as well as ABC News America, that got me onto the plane with the Qataris. If it was not for ABC colleagues and many of my friends in the BBC and my college, my professors, I remember, and my college president, they were like working round the clock for 48 hours, nonstop, until we got to the airport. Remember, my daughter was very small, few months. My parents who are here with me, thanks God, my dad has Parkinson. And on the top of it, my face was known to the Taliban. So the airport was not very far. And that was the problem with that hasty withdrawal, because you had a generation of Afghans who would either work with the West or were seen working with the West or had involvement. And now the Taliban knew exactly where each one lived, from cities to streets to businesses. So thanks God I got out in the end, but so many other people were not lucky. And then I think about 4 days after I arrived in Qatar, there was that suicide attack at the Abbey Gate at the airport, which was heartbreaking.
Right. So it was through your professors and ABC News that would they have convinced Qatar to take you on?
It took more than convincing. It took all sorts of. That's why I'm very grateful to Middlebury, which will always be my home. I think they had to I remember Senator Bernie Sanders wrote me a letter, and many of these others, congressmen, because the college got me that. But they said, you have to take this letter and go to the airport. And I said, the problem is I can't go to the airport, because it's just not possible. So they tried everything. And that's the one thing that you have to really give credit for so many people in the West who went out of their way on a personal level and evacuate Afghans, which is why you have a big community here in Canada. I had always seen Canada from Vermont, right? Because that's where I was studying. So I made sure I went to Montreal when I came here to just see what the other side looked like. And I was lucky, actually, that the Canadians took me because I knew the ambassador and we would be invited to briefings. And this is why I think it is incredibly amazing that Canada has taken a big number of our colleagues from the media, from the civil society, and the government. Yes.
Let me just go back to my question. If it wasn't for those connections and this whole process of, basically getting to the airport and getting on the plane, did you have a plan B? Could you have gone overland? Would you have gone into hiding? What do you think?
Not really, no. Afghanistan is a place where you really can't hide. And this is why I have written in my BBC News online piece that this was a city, Kabul was a city, that I knew it inch by inch. But when the Taliban came, nowhere felt safe. I mean, it's a city of like, let's say, 7 to 8 million people. I could say that, right? But again, I had not thought over the last 2, 3 years that I would make it out alive, because every day when we woke up, we would lose a colleague, female judges, prosecutors, and there was deep mistrust. The government could not protect you. Assassins were roaming in the streets of Kabul, and not to forget that you had regular suicide attacks. But I'm glad that I got out.
Yeah. Well, and we are too.
Thank you. Thank you.
And with your family, that's amazing.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, over the last 18 years, there was a degree of freedom for women and a relative freedom of the press in this war zone. But will those 18 years force any kind of change under the Taliban, or will it go back to 2001?
Well, I mean, there's this wicked idea, right, that people keep talking about Taliban 2.0. And if the Taliban are anything, they're minus 1 point something, right? I mean, that's that the Taliban have not changed. We see that from their policies, right? Look at Afghanistan's Shia and Hazara minorities, how vulnerable they were both under the Republic and both under the Islamic Emirate, right? Look at the issue of closing the gates for schools for girls, not allowing the Afghan women, right? I mean, these are all contradictions that are costing a generation of Afghans their futures and their lives, right? But honestly speaking, if you ask me, over the last 20 years, the Republic was not an island of perfection. It was a system run on corruption. It was a system that was run on death squads. It was a system that was run on deep prejudice. I mean, I'm not going to even go to ethnic issues here. If you are the president and your cousins would be ministers and governors and that kind of stuff, right? So to me, Afghanistan was not sustainable. At some stage, this would have collapsed. But what we had all hoped, that to make things better and to make Afghanistan like sustainable, we should have a credible peace process, which we did not have. And people often forget that what happened in Doha was an exit deal between the Americans and between the Taliban. The Afghan government was never part of it. And when we look at the example of Colombia and many other countries, peace processes have certain ingredients. And here the key ingredients were missing. For example, there was no victim representation. There was none of that on all sides. So I wonder how long American airstrikes and billions of dollars could have kept a corrupt system going on. But I always tell people something else about Afghanistan. It was never an island of perfection. I mean, we come from a very painful past, not too distant, the Civil War, before that, the Russian invasion. So it was not realistic to just see the last 20 years as sort of the magic fix. And I would say this also, I hope this is like an appropriate saying here, I've said it before, that if Afghanistan was like a shrimp, our neighbors are like sharks. Whether they make love or fight, we get hurt. So the regional dynamics are always hurting us. That does not mean that we can park all the blame on the neighbors, right? But you can also not ignore that. For example, Pakistan was hosting the Taliban for 20 years. Their capabilities grew, They had sanctuaries, But on the ground in Afghanistan, the two things that I constantly witnessed, one was corruption, and the second was the issue of injustices. You had death squads under the Republic, these counterterrorism pursuit teams, CIA backed and funded, that were killing Afghans in cold blood. And we were kind of okay with that, actually, So now, what is the way ahead? The Taliban are facing an insurgency from the Islamic State, but also from certain former government officials. And remember, the social changes. Even today, I was coming here, Afghan women were demonstrating on the streets of Kabul. That is not something that would have happened in 2002. So we will see if the Taliban will adjust to the realities, how sustainable are the Taliban themselves? Because now there are rivalries. There's power struggle between the Haqqanis and the Southerners, And I don't want to speculate too much, but we also threw the Afghan women, as a result of all these failed policies, under the buses. When I call my uncle and he tells me his daughter cannot finish the medical education, that she was about to be a doctor, it breaks my heart. And I think that is as simple as it gets, that we basically failed. uh, and also, let's not forget that there's that old saying, and I have to, again, sorry if you have heard it before. The Taliban famously said, in Afghanistan, if the Americans had the watches, we have the time, right? I say, if we had focused on a credible peace process around 2010, when we had more leverage and that kind of stuff, we might have succeeded, right? But things changed quite quickly, and people also must remember that the Taliban have ministries of interior and defense, where they have battalions for suicide attackers. So at some stage, we have to also hold the Taliban responsible and say, okay, if you're traveling to Gulf countries, if you have money, if you're business interest, these things are not okay. And I feel, as an Afghan, Keith, that we have set the bar very low on the Taliban right now. I think that can change.
Okay. That's a very good description of the current situation. And there's a grain of hope there, in that, 50% of Afghanistan, 50% of the population are women, and they have been given a little bit of power. And would you say there's hope there?
Well, again, the Afghan women are at the forefront of this fight, while everyone else has left the Afghan women who are inside the country, and they're putting up a fight, right? There's a lot of pressure. Look, in 2001, no one could stand up to a Talib. I remember it when I was covering them. Today, you have Afghans with mobiles documenting things. You have demonstrations. You have all sorts of pressure. And I would like to think that, while we have all taken our eyes off Afghanistan and with the tragedy in Ukraine and everything, we need to be very mindful that the only solution in Afghanistan is a negotiated settlement, a fair one, right? But that's now on the Taliban. The responsibility is on the Taliban. And this is why, when certain Western governments or institutions go easy on the Taliban, I think they do great injustice, not to their own values, but also to the Afghan women and to Afghanistan.
Right. Let me open this up. Is there anyone with questions? We have a couple of minutes left with Bilal. Does anyone have a question? Yes, there's a hand at the back.
What's the situation?
Sorry, can you tell me your name, please?
My name is Alfred. I live here. I have a question about any communication line with any journalists in Afghanistan right now. Is there any sort of communication line, or is that all controlled 100% by the Taliban, or is there like an underground thing?
Well, I speak to our colleagues. I speak to a lot of the people still, including the Taliban, which is unbelievable, because that has changed now. But our colleagues have had restrictions. For example, colleagues who are in South or West or North, without me giving you specifics, they have been given an 11 point by the Taliban, things that they cannot do, which is literally a big no-no, in the world of journalism. So Taliban, one thing that they're doing, they are controlling the narrative. Second thing that we've had a lot of cases, Taliban soldiers and intelligence people have got into newsrooms and they've beaten our colleagues. They have jailed them. There has been a lot of these cases. So it's very difficult, in terms of reporting. And sometimes I get it wrong, because we have to rely on citizen journalism. We have to find ways to verify things. We've made mistakes, But that's a new reality. Tolo TV, Afghanistan's largest television station, I believe has kept a fight. They have compromised on certain things. Obviously, that's understandable, but they're still there. And I wonder how long will they allow Tolo and others before they shut them. I want to thank Annalie, she's here somewhere, for teaching me actually how to read. That's one thing that, I've done all sorts of things. So thank you very much for being patient with me. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Bilal.
Thank you.